gentlemen, and welcome this to the session of EU Sustainable Energy Week on sectoral integration and the part that sectoral integration can play in the decarbonisation of the EU economy by 2050. Sectoral integration here, of course, means in particular the integration of Europe's electricity networks with Europe's gas networks. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you, as the keynote speaker of this session, Mr. Augustijn van Haasteren from the European Commission, who in the programme you might see is described as a senior gas expert. That's being a little unfair and unkind on Augustijn, because as you're about to discover, he is a senior gas expert and he is also a senior electricity expert. So he's the perfect person to get this session rolling. In fact, there's arguably nobody in the European Commission, and Augustijn was very happy for me to say this to you, by the way, who embodies sector integration more than Augustijn van Haasteren. Ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, after this introduction, anything can only go down the road. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak here. It's both a pleasure and an honor, I should say, to give a few current elements of the current thinking within the Commission when it comes to sector integration, sector coupling, whatever term you want to give to it. As you probably are aware, there's, of course, the last Commission has done a lot of work when it comes to electricity. The Electricity Directive, Regulation, SOS Directive, many elements have been revised with a view also to adapt it to a world which can integrate more renewables. In December or November, the Commission also presented a long-term strategy as to how and what kind of scenarios would exist in order to decarbonize towards net zero in 2050, the European economy as a whole, and as a basis for discussing what is next. And if you ask yourself what is next, I think one thing is very clear. After we have done much work at the side of electricity, where things maybe were not easy, but to some extent easier, we also have to address the issue of the gas and other energy carriers. So the Commission produced this long-term strategy. Any self-respecting body has meanwhile also produced various scenarios in order to define more clearly the pathway. And there are a few commonalities and a number of differences between these various scenarios. The commonalities are that although the consumption of gaseous fuels will certainly decline by 2050, there will still be a role, because in reality a full electrification scenario, apart from the question whether it is possible, is probably not the most cost-efficient way of decarbonizing the economy, as they are industries and sectors which are difficult to decarbonize. And also, in addition, in order to make a renewables penetration very high in our energy sector, we need also, there are synergies between the gas and electricity sector in terms of the gas sector being backup for the electricity sector, and the ability of the gas sector, for instance, to provide flexibility to the electricity sector, but there's a high need for that. There are also differences, though, is that even if there are many pathways identified, there are many differences as to what exactly the pathway could be, and that, of course, is related to the many uncertainties towards 2050. There are technologies which have not yet reached industrial scale. We do not know what the availabilities are. There are issues with public acceptance and so on. We do not know the path. So if we think about what is next, I think the first word we have to keep in mind is tech neutrality. We, as people who think about a regulatory system, we should be very careful in making choices for instead of those people who can actually do this much better than us. And when I say tech neutrality, we can briefly think what we have done also in the on the current still Commission for the electricity. One element and one theme in the electricity package was that we need to provide a market framework which is more conducive to the uptake of renewables and adapt the market framework from what it was and what it was designed for in 2009 to the realities of today, i.e. take into account the particular characteristics of renewables, wind, solar and so on, and make this so that these operators can integrate in a market better at lower costs and risks. So that relates, at that moment in time, related to let's say, making sure that short-term trading is much more incentivized than we initially thought. Unlocking demand-side response, so that is actually not just demand for flexibility, but also a larger supply for flexibility. Making sure that liquidity on short-term markets can cross borders, i.e. harmonization of closing times and so on. And so when we now that that this package has not just been agreed, but actually also a few days ago been published, of course, we as Commission, we are thinking, what should we do next? I already indicated earlier that, of course, one logical thing is to say we need to pay some attention to gas and other fuels. So that, we, in order to do that, well, first of all, I should say that whatever we think about it, the actual decision as to whether there was such a measure will be or what the scope it will be is really for the next Commission. So we're doing some prep work so that if the Commission arrives, we can provide him some ideas. But of course, the Commission will not decide by itself, the Service DG Ener, what and if happens. So if we keep in mind the need to technical neutrality, and we realize also that gas consumption will decrease and the composition of the gases will change, of course, and I already indicated that one of our angles is to look at the ability of these kind of new carriers to operate effectively in the market, to be integrated and connected to electric systems as well. We talk about barriers. Now, when we talk about barriers, and especially in this field, where we speak about an area where there's lots of new technologies, we have not ventured into from a regulatory point of view before. It's not just the Commission. One should not just look to the Commission, because in reality, of course, if you look at the barriers, they also are very much different nature. Taxes, levies, and so on, which the Commission, even if it really wants to, and actually a few days ago it indicated, well, it does actually want to have some kind of influence on that. The reality today is, of course, that this is a member states issue. So there is a collective effort necessary in order to make this work. Another thing is that not just looking at the energy regulatory framework, if we want to have a deep penetration of renewables, we also must look at the ability of sectors which today do not, let's say, are not decarbonized, to be either electrified or are able and incentivized to take on different energy carriers which are decarbonized. That having said, when we look at it from a more market perspective, we have to realize that today quite a few of the carriers many people speak about have no place in the EU regulatory system. And the question in front of us is, what should we do? Should we, let's say in terms of should we just roll out the electricity and gas regulatory framework? That is probably not so wise. We have to make a really careful balance between trying to do something which is not too little too late. In view of the legislative length of the legislative proceedings of the Commission, this is a useful question. Or that we throw out the baby with the bathwater and over-regulate the whole thing into its grave from the start. That is also not the idea. But when it comes to enabling, there are many barriers. I could think, for instance, today when we speak, there's much to speak about hydrogen and the offtake of hydrogen, either as in pure form or as a blended measure. Today, hydrogen, on the regulatory point of view, when used in a gas grid, which is very much looked up as one of the ways to ensure its decarbonization of the gas, is basically treated as a pollutant. There's no standard. In fact, the standard is different. And this is not just a question of decarbonization, it's actually also a question of the internal market, because these developments are likely to be geographically dispersed. And if country A starts to inject lots of hydrogen or biomethane with large oxygen content in its network, and the neighbor doesn't accept this kind of gas, we have tomorrow also an issue with the internal market. So there are various questions which we have to reflect and balance around that. Other things like, are there today injection methods, methodologies for, and connection methodologies and congestion management methodologies for the kind of assets which we hope will connect to the gas network and electricity network? Largely said no. So if you want to, so there is this is as such already a barrier and an uncertainty also for investors, because they do not know exactly under what kind of conditions they will be able to deploy this kind of installations. There's one of the biggest synergies of the which is identified for integrating closer the electricity and the gas network has to do with let's say the avoidance of building new electricity lines and infrastructure there, which is apart from expensive also rather difficult to do. So that has to do a lot to do with infrastructure planning. So I mentioned a few items which are actually part on our list to things to develop, and where we are trying to get a better grip on what the ideas are if we want to take this, let's say, this thinking forward. And I understand my 10 minutes are over, which is very good, because then we can have another point of view on this particular issue.
Thank you very much, Augustin. Would you like to take a seat here on the stage, Augustin? As Augustin has said, ladies and gentlemen, sectoral integration will only work if the gas pipeline infrastructure plays its part. And it's my pleasure now to introduce to you the Secretary General of Gas Infrastructure Europe, Bojana Achowski. Bojana, you're going to speak from the stage here, but you have some slides to share with us or not? No. Great.
Thank you, Giles. It's a pleasure of being here today on this sectorial integration debate, which from my point of view is very timely, of course, and also to have other partners in this debate to see who of us, of the different parts of the industry stays well and what kind of development we have for the moment. I'm coming from Gas Infrastructure Europe, an association which represents the interest of storage operators, TSO, gas TSO operators, and LNG operators in Europe. All our 70 members are very much committed that we can deliver all the, let's say, discussions and everything that was agreed in the Paris Agreement. How we can do that? Very easily, by continuing using the gas infrastructure. So in this perspective, our members are very much committed that such kind of energy transition can happen very fast, in a very low cost, and let's say, last but not least, with a very high level of public acceptance. I would like to start this intervention by returning a bit a few years ago when there was too many discussions that everything should go all electric. And there was this say that indeed these people were omitting the fact that, let's say, electricity isn't only the one solution for all forms of energy demand, and actually that gaseous energy is providing the much more flexibility for a future energy system that is going to be much more renewable based. Whereas electricity supply is of course expected to increase to be a usage of demand, our future energy system will still remain a combination of electrons and molecules. Today I will concentrate my short intervention on three important things. First of all, of what we are having on the table as facts, taking into account the three pillars of the gas infrastructure, then three developments, and how do we see how we are developing ourselves towards the sectoral integrations, and also three facts on what is happening already in the moment. The existing gas infrastructure can underpin an energy transition which will lead to a very low amount of investment needed. So in this perspective, it brings a lot of societal and also economic sense to continue to use the gas infrastructure. We are having 3 pillars, starting with the transmission system operators, the transmission system and the gas pipelines, which are so well interconnected in the European Union that can efficiently transport any gaseous energy in a very long distance. Then we are moving to storages, which are the best solution on providing security of supply. Of course, you know, all of you, what is happening during the winters when you have a very peak demand. But not only this, they also provide flexibility tools for infra-hourly and seasonal operation, and also possibilities in future to store not only natural gas. Then moving to LNG terminals that does not only provide a diversification and security of supply, but best particulate any opportunities to reduce carbon, sulfur, noise, and particular matter of emissions in the maritime and all kind of transport sectors. LNG also give a possibility to very well connect the European LNG market to the global LNG market. Then how we see and what kind of efforts still are needed to continue with the sectorial integration. We definitely see a need that the way that we are develop our energy system in the moment needs to be changed. We require a more integrated way of developing our systems, not in silos, but to see a way how gas, electricity, and heating can work together and to develop our new energy system from there. In this perspective, some of our members are already working and we have good examples in this perspective because some of the gas TSOs already working together with electricity TSOs on, let's say, developing together their national investment plans. Because it's already clear that, let's say, there is a limit to the electrification of the system, and our pipelines can provide a very good solution to and are unavailable for hydrogen and green gas. Then we need to find a new business models to enable the increase of renewable gas. What I'm having in mind here, for example, the way that our energy market is working for the moment, it's something that was developed in the past century. So of course, no one will be interested today, tomorrow, or in 10 years' time, let's say, to invest in such kind of, let's say, scope of the way that this energy system is developing. While maintaining the principles of ownership and bundling, we should allow for innovative business models to offer non-discriminatory aggregated infrastructure services. And in this perspective, I think that the regulation of LNG and storages could be taken as a very good example. And then our members are moving on something that is so-called from theory already to reality. Years ago, there were many studies which were conducted who are taking into account what exactly we'll be able to put in our gas pipelines. Nowadays, and a few months ago, there was the recent study which was published by Navigant and Ecofis, who are talking about 240 BCM of natural gas that could be converted to green molecules. And we are very much committed on doing so. And then at the end, the 3 examples, how we are committed to that. The first gas pipeline was already fully converted to dedicated hydrogen usage. That means that the gas infrastructure can be reused. Second, the storage operators are looking for making a large-scale renewable electricity storage possible with electricity hydrogen that in sound caverns, which will bring the very much needed flexibility. And last but not least, with which I'm going to finish, we are very close to scale up of green gas production towards gasification. And with this, we will be able to deliver the quantities that are mentioned in Ecofis and Navigant study.
Thank you very much, Bojana. Those of you who are standing at the back, there are plenty of seats in the front 4 or 5 rows. Do come forward if you wish. Those of you using interpretation machines might have worked out already. French is in channel 2, German channel 3, and English channel 4. Let's now hear a national perspective. It's a pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Christoph Jügel, who is the Director for Energy Systems at the German Energy Agency. Christoph is also the Director of the Global Alliance Parafuels. Christoph, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First, no doctor title, not yet at least. And second, yes, I'm going to start with a national perspective, as we're the German Energy Agency. As we're the German Energy Agency, we're 100% state-owned, and we're working very closely together with our federal ministries, in plural, several of these, as well as with the industry experts of many different industries, the energy industry and others. And this is very important because we are kind of an independent think tank, and this is a specific and very special role because this means that we are telling the truth to both sides. So we're trying to translate and to interact between the politics and the industry sides for helping both sides to better understand each other. And what we did in here, and are the slides set up for me as well? I brought some slides with me, so it would be great if we could have them in here. Yeah. And so, coming now. It's not mine? Looks good. OK, I'll start anyway. So, topic for today is the integrated energy transition. It's integrated energy. And there's one thing I'd like to highlight whenever I'm starting a speech. This is, why are we talking about integrated energy and not about sector coupling or something like this? And I'm so glad that the European Commission also was moving away from sector coupling to more the integration aspect, because sector coupling just sounds so easy. It sounds as if we could just couple together 2 railway wagons, and from that moment on, they're fixedly linked together, moving in the same direction, in the same speed, towards the same destination. And it's just not that easy. This is a complex problem, and there's no single solution to this. So we're very much focused on integrated energy transition. And this means making sure that all the different market aspects are taken into account, all different customer requirements and expectations, all different technical requirements, all different market and regulatory requirements. Second thing is taking into account all different aspects of a local, regional, national, European, or global energy system with all those interconnections in there. And third aspect in talking about integration is making sure that there's technical and market sides being integrated to each other. So it doesn't help us if there's a technical solution, if there's no market making best use of this technical solution. So this is why we as German Energy Agency are very much focusing on the integrated energy transition. And there's the corresponding chart to this, what I was just saying. What's important for us is another thing. Come on. You did already see all of my charts. So coming back to this now. Thank you, Bojana, for already telling something or saying something very important. In the past, in Germany, and this is, again, a German perspective, we were very heavily working on getting the energy transition come true. And frankly, it was actually an electricity transition. And we were so much focusing on electricity and making renewable electricity get into the grid. And this is very important. But when starting to work on this integrated energy aspect, we learned that we will see further electrification. And this might get up from, let's say, 20% of direct end energy use in electricity today to a doubling to 40%, maybe a tripling to 60%. And there are different studies saying, OK, it's something in between 40 to 60%. But this also means that there's another 40 to 60% that is non-electricity energy carriers. And this is very important for us. And this is one thing that we as German Energy Agency worked out on ourselves in the studies we were conducting together with many, many different partners, and which started a thinking of, hey, and this is, by the way, something that does not only hold true for us in Germany, but is true for Europe as well as for the global aspect. And this is where I'm leaving the the German aspect and starting working on a global thing. And this is actually where I have to change some things in here. And please help me not to forget one thing. This is telling you why I'm doing exactly this and getting rid of my jacket in here. So no, I won't continue on this. It's a start, I know. I won't continue on this. But what's very important and what holds true for the European energy transition is actually that the energy transition is not just energy efficiency. And we have to further work on making energy efficiency increase and getting it better and all that stuff. And we have to make sure that energy efficiency is understood not as a energy first and energy use, but is understood as a holistic energy efficiency approach. Second thing is, the energy transition is not just about more renewable electricity. It is very well about increasing the direct use of renewables, and this is electricity many times, but it's not only. But there's a very important third pillar for a successful energy transition, and this is power fuels. And power fuels means renewable power or electricity-based gaseous and liquid energy carriers and feedstocks. And there's so many things in there that it's really worth it. Oh, come on. It's worth it thinking about this again. So it's important that we're increasing energy efficiency, that we're increasing electrification and direct use of energy, of renewable energies. And it's so important that we find a solution for having gaseous and liquid energy carriers in the system, because there are many applications out of our today's perspective where there just is no other solution for a direct electrification in there. Plus, there are so many cases in there why it's the most economic energy transition, having a diverse, a broad technology mix and then a mix of energy carriers and infrastructures. Plus, it's so necessary to also help the existing infrastructures and existing devices, existing applications to find a decarbonization, defossilization, climate-friendly way. So we need to find a solution for renewable gases and liquid energy carriers, and we need to find a way for getting to renewable feedstocks for many different industries, so basic industries, the petrochemical industries. We need to find solutions for ammonia, methanol, ethanol, and many more. And this is where power fuels came in. So those electricity-based renewable feedstocks and energy carriers, very important on this. And this is why I was moving from the German side to the European and global side. This is where we as German energy agency understood this is something that we as Germans cannot do alone, but we have to partner up with many people, last sentence. This is why we initiated a global alliance, Power Fuels, trying to bring together many actors from many different areas of the world. And you find some information leaflets out there about this global alliance, because we're very much inviting all of you to join us in there, helping us to foster a global market for power fuels, both in Europe as well as then globally as well. So thank you very much on this.
Thank you. Right, an industry perspective now.
Sorry, nobody asked why I did take off my jacket. And I said it's very important saying this, because we spend so much time sitting in air-conditioned rooms talking to each other. And time is over. Sorry for it, time is over. If we need solutions on this, on decarbonized energy carriers, feedstocks, whatever it is, and we're thinking of innovation cycles, technological innovation cycles, covering several decades, and we want to be, quote, net carbon zero by 2050, we have to start working on this right now. And this is the very important message to the European Commission and any others. Please get off your jackets, start working it, start allowing the markets out there to develop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, an industry perspective. Ralph Wesel, Secretary General of EU Turbines. Ralph, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just going to go over there, but I keep my jacket on. Apologies, Christoph.
And I hope we have Ralph's slides.
That would be helpful.
Yes.
Yes. Well, Christoph was trying to teach us a bit about that we should use an improved terminology, not using sector coupling anymore, saying it's more complex. Maybe just to remind you, there's a technology coupling sectors and the different grids already for quite some time, which is gas power plants connecting the gas with the heat and electricity grids. So it's there. We know it's complex, but it's there since some time. We talk a lot about power to gas nowadays, which is the kind of coupling in the opposite direction from power to gas. But we need both coupling points, because otherwise we can't use the benefits of the systems and connect them properly. So I guess most of you would agree that gas power plants are something that we will need for a number of years. We want to phase out coal. We need dispatchable energy to electricity to ensure that we have the long-term balancing, a backup, and so on. But I think quite a number in that room might probably say, but this is a transitional technology because it's not compatible with our climate targets that we have. So what are we doing? Is it transitional technology? I think my answer, of course, is no, we don't think so. On this slide, you just see that you can use very different ways to produce steam to operate a steam turbine, not only coal, a lot of different ones. And there's a lot of gases that you can use for operating a gas turbine. I think that's just what you need to understand, because most people think about a gas turbine as a fossil gas turbine, which is what you know from the past. But to be very clear about that, the gas turbine doesn't care. It needs a gas, but it doesn't care if that gas is a fossil or a renewable gas. It simply needs a gas with the right composition to produce electricity and heat out of it. Now, with that in mind, I think the answer is yes, we can maintain the advantage of providing dispatchable power with gas power plants if we manage to switch to renewable gases and make it fit to the climate targets. That's the requirement that we need to fulfill. And our members, the manufacturers of the gas turbines, sat down over the last year and said, well, what does it take? Where are we today with regard to that? What does it take to ensure that we can switch to renewable gas? And they came out with a number of commitments, first describing what we can do today, then putting some milestones out, 2020, 2030, and saying we commit to fulfill certain promises by 2020 and 2030 to be ready for renewable gas. And what are those commitments? They're here. The first one is to be also clear, already today, most turbines can operate with renewable gases, as long as those renewable gases are close to, in their composition, close to natural gas. For example, if you take biomethane, you can already use it. If you use synthetic methane from renewable electricity, you can already use that with a turbine. So it's already possible for a number of renewable gases. We can also use, already today, in most turbines, 3 to 5% of hydrogen blended into the gas grid. Now, what they promised the manufacturers for 2020, and you know it's almost tomorrow, is that by that year, we will be able to manage 20% of hydrogen blended into the gas grid. So that's quite a step forward. We would not provide any gas turbines in Europe anymore that are not capable of running at all with renewable gases. And by 2030, the manufacturers promised that any customer that needs a gas turbine that operates with 100% of hydrogen will get one in Europe. So by 2030, everybody who needs a gas turbine operating completely carbon neutral can get that. The last commitment is the one that you see as number 5 in the middle at the bottom. That's a very important one, which is saying that the manufacturers will provide retrofit solutions, making existing gas power plants ready for operating with renewable fuels with hydrogen. So the big fleet that we will have there will be able to operate with renewable fuels. This is very important, as we constantly today face a discussion where people say you can't invest in new gas power plants because they will become stranded assets, they will contribute to a carbon lock-in. This is not true. You can operate those gas power plants with renewable fuels. So Poland, for example, could do the switch from coal to gas now, cut emissions in half using natural gas for the moment, but can use the same technology to switch later on when they have enough renewable gas to seamlessly switch to renewable gas. This is using the benefits of technology to make progress immediately and not wait until we have certain other technologies developed in the longer future. So I think what I wanted to say is really sector coupling, integration. Sorry, I forgot your word.
Integrated energy.
Integrated energy is something that we can start progressively, and we can use the benefits. That's the message. We are ready, and we have the technology ready to be used for that. So it's not about stranded investments on this gas power plants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I imagine you've all got your own opinions on the presentations that you've heard this morning, but we're going to hear, first of all, the opinions of 3 experts, and I'd like to call up onto the stage. Please welcome them. Yorgo Chatzimarkakis, the Secretary-General of Hydrogen Europe, James Watson, the Secretary-General of Eurogas, and John Cooper, Secretary-General of Fuels Europe. Yorgo.
You get it? Okay. John. Right. How are you doing? Yeah, good. Good, yeah. Oh, you are at that end.
So, Yorgo, what do you make of what you've heard so far?
It's okay. Is the micro...
The mic should be on. Technicians, is the mic on for Mr. Chatzimarkakis?
Yes.
It is?
It is.
Yes, good. So,
First of all, thanks very much, Giles. Well, I have to say that hydrogen is the entry ticket for Giles to Bojana's grid. So basically, when we talk about sector coupling, it's connecting the grids. But what you said is indeed something we should think about. We need not just sector coupling, we need also the sectoral integration, which is the, if you wish, the translation of renewable power into the sectors. And what we see is that we have achieved a lot in the power sector as such. We did not achieve the same amount of renewable energy in the heating and cooling sector, and not at all in mobility. One of the reasons you can see here that the same amount of electricity or of energy that is carried by 8 power pylons, which is 3 gigawatt each here, can be carried via the gas grid. By the way, this is not something that we have to discuss with people protecting their landscapes, but also biodiversity, but that's an issue. And we discover that more and more the member states are not able to build up these pylons. They lack in investing fast enough for the ramping up of the renewables. That is why we think it's very, very important to start to help the electricity friends. It's not about going against them. No, they are a very, very important part, but as we heard, it's not the only way to decarbonize the system. It's an integral, maybe the most important part in the long run, but we need to help them. And how can we help them? Pipelines. So existing pipeline system can store 350 times more energy than the power system. 350 times more. Can it carry hydrogen? Partly yes. We were talking about blending. So very old pipelines can carry hydrogen because in old times, before the natural gas times, so to say, the gas was town gas based on lignite with a lot of hydrogen content. So these pipelines can carry it. Not all of them. Valves, compressors have to be changed. However, there are technologies like this here. This is a polyethylene pipeline that can stand 200 bar. You can put it into an existing pipeline. You can run 2 systems. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because all of these technologies that have been discussed here need or purity, like the turbines. Turbines need purity. Is it a gas pipeline? It's another turbine. Or is it a hydrogen pipeline? Blending is also possible, but pure. 60%. So you need to be accurate, a little bit more accurate. You also need to use existing feedstock. We were talking about the power fuels. Very controversial here in Brussels, not as controversial as in Germany. In Germany, people like it a little bit more. Maybe it comes to Brussels, I don't know. But what I can say is that my friends, our friends from the biogas field, Biogas Association, they have CO2 as a waste of 300 million tons per year. 300 million tons per year waste CO2 biogenic. So this CO2, if you combine it with renewable hydrogen, is a green fuel. So it's a green power fuel. It's wonderful. So we can decarbonize, but need CO2 as a green feedstock, biogenic, circular feedstock. We need pipelines for that. And what we have is an existing pipeline system. That's why I love to work with Bojana. We have a pipeline system that is strong, that is very, very dense in some parts of Europe. What we need to do is to repurpose it in parts, not all of it, in parts. Some hydrogen pipelines, some CO2 pipelines, and then we will have a very, very mixed world of applications, and I come to an end. The point is that every technology that can help to decarbonize, to deeply decarbonize the system is welcome. Hydrogen is not the silver bullet. Hydrogen is quite an enabler for a lot of them. That's why everybody talks about hydrogen. We are there, and we are there to stay. And the good thing is, and that's my most important message, we are cooperating with each other. So that's very, very important that we are a coalition of the willing. And I say this, I think John will be the next speaker, because John Fuels is also very much cooperating with us. And I see a change to previous years where, I'm very honest now, where some industries, don't talk about fuels, talk about OEMs, were very arrogant. No, we don't need to change. Diesel, will there last forever? That changes at the moment. And the coalition of the willing sits here. And that's very important. And we are moderated by giants, by wind. Thank you.
Thanks. So, John Cooper, are you still arrogant or have you changed?
That's definitely introduction of the week. Thanks very much, Giles. Yes. So, yeah, John Cooper Fuels Europe. What do Fuels Europe do? It's actually refining petroleum. But let's just take a step back. What nature has been doing in terms of energy and molecules for a few million years. Nature, for years, has been making and storing chemical energy as liquids and gases for several million years. And if you actually look at what they've done, what nature has done with electricity, it struggles to get beyond electricity storage in a cloud for more than maybe an hour or something. And we think that's quite significant in terms of understanding the physics we've got to play with on planet Earth. Molecules are undoubtedly absolutely critical to the future energy system, in particular the industrial energy system. Energy storage, we need energy storage for weeks and months, not only for hours, to enable substantial electrification as well. And there are some core technologies that we've already talked around here today that go between power and molecules. And carbon capture, absolutely key, either for storage or for utilization. Green hydrogen, either green direct from renewables or blue using CCS. And then power to gas and power to liquids technologies. It's very clear that they're absolutely key for a number of industries. If I can go to the next slide, actually, there's one slide that we prepared, which is the matrix. So Fuels Europe has worked with a total of 11 energy-intensive industries over the last 18 months to create a report that was submitted to the Commission to help inform the Clean Planet document that was out in November. And this one slide, it's just the one slide I'm using, is the core of that report, which shows essentially a matrix of industries versus technologies, industries down there on the left-hand side, technologies across the top. And you essentially say it's the same set of technologies that is needed for just about every energy transition, including the ones for the fuels as well, fuel sectors. And my simple message is we need to set a vision of getting really good in Europe at doing these technologies at great scale, We've done the first stages with substantial deployment of renewables. Renewable power, that is. For sure, we need to do more of that, but we also need to really master these molecule-based technologies at scale. I'm going to leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sean. So, James Watson, Eurogas, what's on your mind?
Well, I just actually pick up your go first and foremost. You need our pipes too. We love Boyanas, but you also need the distribution system. 2.2 million kilometers of distribution pipes across Europe, and they will be needed if we're going to do this energy transition. Totally agree with Christoph. This is about energy integration. There's no question we need all vectors. Every vector is needed. You only have to go to the long-term strategy document from the European Commission, which says very clearly the gas infrastructure is needed to deliver. I believe that also there's going to be a need for fuels. So I think we will also be looking at a multi-vectored future in 2050. What it will be, though, is renewabilized and decarbonized. And I think this is how we should talk about the terms of 2050. It is a renewabilized and decarbonized future. Multi-vector, but all having the same elements, renewabilized and decarbonized. And so I would say that's where I would start from. Of course, you look at those long-term strategy documents, you see things like, well, you hear people say that gas may only be a niche product by 2050. I looked at those studies. I looked at 1.5 tech scenario. You've got 300 plus BCM of gaseous fuels. Today it's about 450. So you're still talking about 66%, 70% of the gas market still being in place. The question is, what is in those pipes? Yes, we need the gas. European Commission recognizes it. And of course, you have hydrogen here today. Obviously, that's a very important point. We will also point out, of course, you need to have the biomethane, the biogas. That's going to be absolutely vital as well, because it is energy integration, and we have to go into all the different hard-to-decarbonize areas. We have to go into transport. We have to go into heating. We have to go into industrial processes. We will need those multi-vectors because that is the only way you can decarbonize it. And we're all serious. We all want to achieve it. We are a coalition of the willing. I totally agree with that. It is great to see the different elements of the gas sector, the fuel sector, turbines industry, and of course wind, all representing a common view about how we need to go forward and really deliver that objective that we've set ourselves. I'll just finish on 3 points. When we look at the pillars of how we actually make that transition, the most important thing is we have the right framework. And I'd pick up on what Augustine said a bit. We definitely need to make sure that when we do the gas package, we make sure the internal market can deliver the technologies we need. And that comes to sort of point 2. You have the right regulatory framework. 2 is you need the right investment framework. So the regulatory framework must assist the investment that we need. And 3rd is the point that we often forget in Brussels, because we're all lobbyists and we love regulatory and we love money and we talk about it all the time. And when we've got a good framework in place, we pat ourselves on the back and go home. And then nothing happens for 5 years in member states. We say, why is that? Because public acceptance is saying, no, we just like status quo, thank you very much. And that's what we have to actually also make sure that we work together to overcome public acceptance issues in member states. They really are underestimated, and I think we need to make sure that when we move to an economy that is more based on hydrogen, on biomethane, on renewables, that we ultimately are able to make sure that people accept that change. Thank you, Giles.
Thank you, James. Can I just clarify one of the points you made? You referred to the Commission's 1.5 tech scenario, one of the 8 scenarios in A Clean Planet for All, of course, and their gas demand number is 150 BCM?
No, it's about 260 terawatt hours. So in gas, we always turn everything to billion cubic meters because that's what we're always measuring. And that comes out around about 310, 320 billion cubic meters. You could say that's quite an aggressive approach towards gas. And you look at other studies like Navigant that are saying you could probably get over 270 just from the bio-green side and up to 400 if you're using the blue hydrogen as well. So we're fairly confident that there will still be a gaseous future, and I don't think we were talking about a niche.
OK, so 320 BCM in 2050, down from 450 today under the 1.5 tech scenario. Thank you for clarifying that. Jorgo, how much hydrogen can you safely put in a gas pipeline today?
Depends on the member state, and depends whether you have down the road a fueling station, a CNG fueling station. Then it's only 2%. Because the car cannot cope with it, the application cannot cope with it. But you have different applications, different member states. I would say safely up to 20% is technically no problem. However, the question is blending such a good idea? I think as a transition technology. It's okay, it can be used. In the long run, we need dedicated pipelines, dedicated for all the purposes. It's much better. But in the transition, yes, and it happens. It happens in many member states already. I can give you the wonderful example of the Energy Park Mainz, where 6 windmills produce 6 megawatt for the utility of Mainz, normal business. Once the grid is full, it switches in milliseconds into the electrolyzer and produces hydrogen. And the magic of this place is there is the gas grid connected to this electrolyzer. So it goes directly into the gas grid. It's fascinating to see, and it works. And up to 7%, no real problem, but then becomes a problem for some applications.
Okay, and what do you want in the gas package?
I want in the gas package something that you and your friends from Solar profited from. I want clear targets. I mean, you had feed-in tariffs. That led to a situation of curtailment. We had curtailment last year, just German figures, 1.4 billion. That's a lot because we did not ramp up the power grid. What we want is targets step by step. So we want more and more hydrogen to be used in order to decarbonize or renewabilize. I love this word, renewabilize, because it's 2 different ways that you can use hydrogen. You have the green hydrogen, which is renewabilizing, and you have the blue, which is decarbonizing because you take off the CO2 and you store it.
Okay, new renewables don't get feed-in tariffs anymore, but you're asking for feed-in tariffs for clean hydrogen, are you?
No. I want to learn also from the mistakes that we did that the regulators did. I think we are not clear, but targets are maybe the best option. Clear targets are the best option to achieve more hydrogen in the system.
Okay, John, do you agree with that?
Not really, actually, no. I think we have to reflect on what's worked for wind and solar to get us where we are today. It was several policies working together, a Renewable Energy Directive, the ETS, and also feed-in tariffs. And in particular, the feed-in tariff gives you an investable case because you know what your income and your demand is. I'm not saying that's necessarily the solution, but it's important to understand what worked for the investors to get that business case signed off and the money into that project. Targets, to me, is not something that helps get an investment signed off. It doesn't show you how you get a return on the money that's put into the capital. So I do think we've got to think harder about policy, about how policy recognises embedded carbon in products, because actually we're talking substantially about industry that we're powering here. They make products, they're competing internationally with an industry that was typically not going at the same pace in decarbonisation. And so there's something that you said actually about customers. We've got to find a way of describing the carbon intensity reductions that we have all the way through to the customer. And I think that takes government leadership, and it takes some form of guarantee of return on investment to start with, which might feel a bit like a feed-in tariff.
Okay, are the business models in place to deliver all those triple X's that you showed on your wonderful matrix earlier, John?
No.
Okay, how can the gas package, if at all, help give you those business models?
I'm going to say I'm not an expert on the gas package. I think we've got to think hard about what I've just said, getting policy that actually designs a commitment to a price difference for a period of time for the different technologies we're talking about deploying here. It can't be just a target-based system.
Okay, James, I'm coming to you in a moment, Jorgo. James, how would you deliver business models?
Well, I think there are a number of business models that need to be developed and brought forward, and actually would do what Jorgo does and have a look at how things were done in electricity. And I think that one of the things we need to make sure of, which also relates to what John said, and that's guarantees of origin, also for the visibility to consumers, to all the consumers that are actually investing in renewable and decarbonised assets. I think it's important that we actually create a proper guarantees of origin system that also covers the gaseous fuel side. This needs to be cross-border, exchangeable, and basically this is something we would expect the gas package to look at and help facilitate based on what we've seen in the Renewable Energy Directive. So there are certain things that need to be done. We'd probably agree with Jorgo and say, yes, targets are a good way of doing things. Whether we're going to go for feed-in tariffs, Charles, I think we both know that's probably not the best direction also to build in public acceptance. So you're probably looking at tender schemes. And also in the future, moving away from what we've called sort of PPAs on the electricity side, more into sort of energy purchasing agreements. So you could have sort of EPAs that would look at different vectors, which aren't just about electricity, where you could provide gas or liquid fuels on a long-term basis to individual off-takers. So I think we have to build those models. And I'm sure that Augustin, as he is a living embodiment of the energy integration, knows very well what has been used on the electricity side and what could work well for the gas side. And that's the kind of joined-up thinking that we're going to need. And I would say that Jorge is right. We look at what didn't work as well as what did work and try and make that the pillar for the framework that we need for the regulation.
Thank you. Jorge.
Well, targets only give some guarantee that networks or infrastructure will be built. But I give you another very concrete example that goes into your business. Just CO2 pricing has nothing to do with the gas package, is very, very decoupled from that and very important. Yesterday, BP, one of your members in the Outlook, said if you have a CO2 price of 80 per ton, then it makes much sense for BP, for your members, to invest into power to gas and to use this hydrogen as a feedstock for their refining. So you can replace in refining grey CO2, conventional CO2, by green CO2. That ramps up our market, that brings down the price of electrolyzers, makes you much greener. And that is something we have to work on, CO2 pricing. So ETS, I don't know, CO2 pricing, it's a very good idea. Every big business in fossil tells me if there is a price on CO2 that urges me to go into something alternative, I turn to you immediately to hydrogen. That's what we want.
And can you tell us, while we're on prices, what is the cost differential today between conventional hydrogen and renewable hydrogen?
€10 per kilo, so 2 to 12. It depends where you go. So
conventional 2, renewable
yes.
12.
Conventional 2, renewable 12. But there is already a big Saudi Arabia is the biggest producer of the world. Saudi Aramco producing green hydrogen, so renewably produced hydrogen, for $1.80 the kilo. $1.80, because the electricity price makes up 80% of the hydrogen price. And electricity in the Saudi Arabian peninsula can be produced with less than 2 cents per kilowatt hour. That makes it absolutely stupid not to produce hydrogen, and that's why they buy these pipelines. They are white, polyethylene, sun protecting. You put it in the desert, and it will be exported possibly to Europe.
Thank you, Jorgen. For those in the audience who are not gas experts, what is your exact unit here? It's €2 per watt?
Per kilo.
Per kilo, and €12 per kilo. Okay. Now, James, you're probably using different units, different indicators, but
Unfortunately.
tell us today what is the cost of biogas, because there is biogas being made today in Europe. What is its cost, and how far is that away from commercial viability?
Again, of course, it depends on the geography and the availability of feedstocks. So, you won't take one figure out of context, but say if you're looking in Germany, you are probably talking in the ranges of around €70 megawatt hour. And of course, the idea is that as we invest more, the capital costs will come down. As we create more availability of second-generation feedstock, the feedstock costs will also come down. And some of our members are already mapping over the next 10 years with a carbon price, talking about carbon pricing, how that you could actually see a crossover point with natural gas within 10 to 15 years. So biogas and biomethane are definitely a proposition which has the same kind of opportunity that we've seen with technologies like solar, which reduced their costs by about 75% in 8 years. It's something that we could also imagine with the right regulatory framework, and we have to keep putting that caveat in, that you can do the same thing for biomethane and biogas. And of course, biomethane and biogas have the big advantages that you can just run them more or less into the existing infrastructure. So you're not talking about infrastructure upgrades. So you're making actually a very low-cost transition, which could be useful for industry, could be useful in heating, in other applications that are perhaps hard to reach for decarbonisation purposes.
Okay, you're using megawatt hours here, which is
Yeah,
what people use in electricity generally.
Exactly. That's why I thought I'd use it, Giles, to sort of try to help you make the comparison.
Well, don't worry about me. Think about the audience.
Well, I think for all the audience, we talk about megawatt hours, million tons of oil equivalent, terawatt hours I've mentioned, and billion cubic meters. I think it's always very difficult for everybody to know what the hell is this. So it's always one of those sort of things where you have different sectors talking. What are we actually talking about? I think if you just to help you imagine, one of the largest the markets in Europe for gas is the UK, and that's around about 100 BCM that it consumes every year. So if your market in Europe today is 450, the UK's gas consumption is about 20% of it. This gives you an idea of how much gas is being consumed. I hope that helps. Okay. And if it doesn't, I'll get my communications people to work on some really nice examples of how much BCM equals what per town.
And of the 450 BCM being produced today, what percentage or how much is bio today?
Today we're about 4%. So around about, I would say, 18, 19 BCM. But that's growing relatively quickly. You look at France. In the last 4 years, they've gone from having about 11 biomethane installations to about 80. So this is something which can be done. Even in the current situation, you can drive that forward. But if you make it easier, if you allow injection to the grid, if you look at how you could use injection directly into distribution systems, you really would be able to drive that much faster. So we still need to tweak. We need to get the edges right to bring this forward.
And what's the exact cost comparison? I mean, you've given us a figure, 70 euros a megawatt hour for biogas, between biogas and conventional gas today.
Okay, well, in Germany today, I think you're trading gas around about 16 euros a megawatt hour.
16 euros a megawatt hour?
16 euros a megawatt hour.
Okay, and your biogas is 70 today.
Yeah.
That's the delta today. Okay, thank you for that. Good. Now, thank you very much to our discussants. I'm going to allow our presenters to come back in now, because I'm sure you've got some reactions to what you've heard from John, James, and Jorgo. Before I do, John or Jorgo, any points you would wish to throw into the discussion right now?
Yes.
I thought you wouldn't let us down, Jorgo, yes.
No, it's directed to John. We could even, without a CO2 price, but with the targets that are given to the mobility sector and to the fuel sector, already work directly to replace conventional hydrogen by green hydrogen now. Port of Rotterdam, your home, so to say, 20% of all CO2 emissions of the Netherlands. Only the Port of Rotterdam because of the refineries. So imagine what impact could be achieved immediately to abate CO2 if we both would work together, John. Is that not a nice? I take off my jacket next time, so we. That's a nice perspective.
I agree, but there is another important point out of your illustration. And by the way, that picture we used was the Port of Rotterdam earlier. The problem is today, we make that fuel, we put it on the market. A boat comes in from outside of Europe with competing fuel, made not the same way. It's recognised on the market the same way. So the critical point is, what do you do about international trade and recognising carbon there? We actually really want to do this in Europe, but we have to be competitive today with an industry that is not doing it.
True. Make Europe great again. Let us be the leaders of that. That's it. It's a political decision. So they need to want it, to pay a little bit for it, but then we can go. We are ready. We are ready. Electrolyzer industry, hydrogen industry is ready. That's the important message. We can ramp up immediately. We just need your go.
Christoph.
And his help.
Christoph, you told us all about power fuels. And I looked carefully at your slide, and on the left-hand side, the feedstock seemed to be renewable electricity, or was some of it bio?
No, actually, power fuels is electricity-based, it's power-based.
Okay.
But this is a very important question, actually. So we really have to make sure that there are many things already said, but talking about gas package, talking about regulation, talking about evolving regulatory framework, we really have to make sure that there's an understanding that renewables are just more than biofuels, and renewables are biofuels and power fuels. And power fuels are very important because with the further ramp up of using renewables in the systems, whether this is renewable electricity by wind turbines or whatever it is, or whether this is renewable biogene energy carriers, we're more and more coming to acceptance problems all over Europe. And in Germany, this is a heavy problem right now. So we have to make sure that we're solving these problems. And one option of solving these is actually making better use of technology. And technology is evolving, and it's Actually, I was sitting down together with the Equinor global head of gas and global head of analytics last week, and we were discussing, hey, thinking back a couple of years, we were doing studies a couple of years ago, were there any surprises in looking back which we didn't foresee in our back then studies out of today's? And there were two answers in this. Yes, one surprise was that social acceptance is much harder than we thought back then. We thought that people would take on this renewable thing much faster. And second surprise is that technology involvement, technology innovation, technology cost regression is much faster than we would have thought in many aspects. And this is something that we have to make best use of in making sure that renewables equals biofuels and power fuels. And this then means, okay, what can we do with them? If there's such a huge cost gap, whether this is gaseous or liquids, it's the same. Okay, what do we have to do on this? Jorge just said one thing, a carbon pricing is very important, because a carbon pricing helps us to levelize this playing field for making sure that there is a fair competition on those different options. And this is part of the answer to what are we going to do with international global competition ships coming in. This is part of the answer. But other parts is actually that when talking about regulatory frameworks and involvement of these, we have to make sure that there is long-term planning stability for getting a ramp-up of these technology-driven power fuels. And how do you achieve this? By having a long-term stable demand for these green renewable things. How do we get to a stable demand for renewable energy carriers? Well, by making sure that there's a value for them. And the current situation is, and thank you very much, Sean, for saying so, there just is no market difference. There is no value between the fossil and the renewable energy carriers. So we have to make sure that, yeah, costs go down. But second thing is, value goes up by giving those renewable energy carriers and feedstocks a value. And this could be achieved by closing in, by, for example, deciding in which early market there might be a higher willingness to pay, a higher carbon abatement costs of other options, whatever it is, for making sure that those are able to make best use of those renewable options, whether this is hydrogen or derivatives of hydrogen then. And this could, for example, be the refineries example, because there's a huge hydrogen demand and it could very well make sense allowing them to use these renewable hydrogen in quotas and whatever it is. So this is part of the involvement of regulatory framework, making sure level playing field, carbon costs, giving renewable options a fair market value, and thus making best use of technological innovation that's coming. And cost regression is coming.
Okay, thank you. John, are you open-minded on whether it's power fuels that come from renewable electricity or whether it's that plus bio fuels? Do you have a preference between the two, or are you agnostic?
You need both. You need both, and you need both in large quantities, and you need to get good at the technologies. We actually think that advanced biofuels may come a little earlier because the agriculture sector does have waste biomass that we can start with. Power fuels take a lot of electricity. We need to build that capacity and work out how that integrates with industrial demand. But we actually say we need to get started on both and do as much as possible. I mean, the demand for liquid energy, we think, will be huge. And when you think of sectors such as maritime and aviation, very difficult to see how they're going to go fully to, a battery storage system. In fact, impossible for long-haul aviation. And the long-haul, so the long-term destination is almost certainly power fuels. Mm-hmm. And it'll take some decades to get there, so we need to get going.
Okay, James, are you also agnostic between power fuels and bio, or do you have a preference for bio?
No, I think that we're very much agnostic. You need both. You need the decarbonised blue hydrogen, you need the green hydrogen coming from renewable electricity, and of course you need the bio as well. I mean, basically, this is the only way that you can actually reach those targets. And if you look at the long-term strategy, it makes it very clear. Also includes synthetic methane, by the way, which is sort of e-gas. And so from this point of view, all of those vectors are included in the gaseous fuel assessment of the European Commission. So I think it would be folly for anybody to say we don't need one or the other. We absolutely need them all. And we will have to have the right investment framework developed to deliver them. I'm very, very clear on this, because I think that if we don't do it, then we'll only have ourselves to blame for not reaching the climate targets we've set ourselves. We have the opportunities, we have 30 years, we must make the investments. In some industries, we're one investment cycle away from 2050, so we need the investment security, the framework now.
an important element of any investment
Yes,
framework.
I'm going to join you, Christoph. I think you've got your go. I'll be the next volunteer. We'll all be taking our jackets off in a minute. John already has.
An important element of any investment framework is the fiscal regime. A number of you have touched or rather tiptoed around this. It's widely understood that consumers, household and industrial, are not switching out of fossil gas, dirty gas boilers or motor cars into electric motor cars because they are taxed more when they consume electricity than they are when they consume gas in most member states. Now, there is a suggestion in Germany and in a few other countries at the moment that actually the fiscal system should be modified so that, leave aside the relative taxes on gas and electricity, let's just make sure that if you're consuming dirty energy, you're paying more taxes on it than you are if you're consuming clean energy. Would you be open to that as a policy option? Clearly, it's something to be pursued at national level with the odd nudge from the European Commission, perhaps. So, John, first of all, on this.
Yes, for sure. I mean, let me talk you through a particular example, and I can give you a choice of units, but actually I'm going to suggest maybe the most familiar one is the cost of diesel fuel, about 75 cents wholesale, but of course by the time you get to the pump, it's probably more like €40 per litre of diesel fuel you buy. Power fuels today, power to liquids diesel, come in at around €2 a litre wholesale. So if you're looking wholesale prices, yes, it's 3 times. But if you could say, actually, we'll sell power fuels untaxed, it's a near zero emission fuel. It would convert basically any vehicle on the road to be a near zero emission vehicle. And €2 compared with about 140 sounds actually reasonably affordable, particularly if the vehicle is a very efficient vehicle and that's already reduced your consumption. So that's something you could do with tax. And yet the strange thing is, if you make that fuel today and you put it on the market, you pay the same tax on it as if it was fully petroleum diesel. So yes, of course, we have to go there.
Jorgo.
Do you see the difference? John would not have argued 2 years ago like that, or 1 year, even 1 year ago like that. No, for me it's very important that there is a change. And that's why I reiterate, this is a coalition of the willing. We have people like Ralf who can do that. He can produce the turbine that uses the different fuels or gases that we produce here. And that's the important thing. I think the most important message of this day or of this meeting is that John says, yes, I prefer this option. That means a disruption of the production of these fuels. It's a disruption. We need more wind, more solar, but also another approach to the decarbonizing technologies and the synthesizing the e-fuel technologies. And that is very radical. But in order to get there, we need him. He needs to give the member states a little bit of guidance. Go for it. At the moment, there's not even a tax on kerosene. Give you another example of Rotterdam. In Rotterdam, the refineries produce kerosene, and the pipeline goes directly to Frankfurt, to Düsseldorf, to Schiphol. A direct pipeline with kerosene, so you don't carry it with trailers. Would you produce e-kerosene? Because we all agree, in aviation, we need to have synthetic fuel or biofuel. Synthetic is better. So you can do it in the Netherlands. You can produce with wind, his wind, our hydrogen, and the CO2 from our biogas friends, biogenic green e-kerosene. And you can ship it or carry it via pipeline directly to Frankfurt. This is possible, but we need you to give us a little bit of a framework.
Get off your jacket.
Okay, panelists, when I'm plugging wind energy, I say there's 300,000 people in Europe who work in our industry. Wind is made in Europe. We make the turbines. I want all of you to share with the audience how far this transition you're describing is going to be made in Europe. Ralf, your turbines that are going to take 100% hydrogen by 2030, made in Europe?
Sure.
Excellent. James.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, biogas.
Yes,
Made in Europe.
Yes, can be done, but also, I mean, it depends on your geographical or political, because we also talk a lot to countries like Ukraine and talk to them about the possibility of them moving beyond the idea of being a transition, a country which basically has the transport of gas across it to being a producer, because you could actually produce, green hydrogen, you could produce biogas in Ukraine, and sell it to us in Europe, still geographically Europe. So if we take it as a whole, yes.
Okay, because we are spending collectively between us all 5 billion euros every week importing dirty fossil fuels from outside Europe today. But you can tell us, James, we can cut that with your biogas and your clean stuff.
Well, and also, which would make you happy, I think also with green hydrogen. I think we really should take the examples of what Jorgo said about Saudi Arabia. I think you're talking about the cheapest electricity in the world being produced by solar in the Arabian Peninsula, which means you can create the cheapest green hydrogen. Why would we not continue our trading relationships with our neighbours? I don't really believe, and I will say this as rather than fully Eurogas, I don't understand why we would stop wanting to be a good neighbour. I think it's important that we continue our relationships with Algeria, with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, with Ukraine, with Russia. We've been a very good, stable partner for them, and I think that we should continue to be so. But we want a different product. We want a premium product. We want the product that we will also pay for, which will maintain our relationships. Look, I'll just give you one final anecdote. I was there with some of your members as well when the European Commission was meeting the Algerian delegation coming here to talk about the future of the energy mix in Europe. And their faces were going grey as they were watching the natural gas disappearing down to 50 BCM in 2050, because they said, but that's what we actually export to you today. What happens to us? And the answer was, actually, you can still send us, because you've got good wind, you've got good solar, you can still send us the green hydrogen, or you can do CCS and give us the blue hydrogen and we'll still take it from you. Your future is not over. We need something different from you. And I think that's a good, positive message, which will also help keep our costs down. The cost for the European consumer can be reduced if we use our trade policy effectively.
Jorgo, electrolyzers made in Europe?
Electrolyzers, definitely yes. Wind, question to you, is Morocco part of Europe?
No.
No. So we are producing, you will be producing, you are already producing with your wind turbines a lot of renewable electricity in Morocco. And that's only one example. And that's why the energy as such will not be European. And with my Greek name, I take the privilege to compare two words, myths and maths. Myth is we can build it in Europe. No. Maths is, if we calculate, it will be very, very good, cheaper for us to produce this in Northern Africa. And I would add a country, Mauritania. Take Mauritania, a country with a vast, space, with a lot of sun. And if we develop as good Europeans this space and allow value creation, we also do something for migration. It will be renewable. It will be carried by pipelines. It will be good for us. It will be good for them. It will be good for all of us. Let's start it. By the way, in 1986, I became politically active exactly because of this idea. Chernobyl, and then I saw a poster at my university, let's stop nuclear. Let's start solar to hydrogen in the Sahara. And that's 86. And we are still here. We can develop it now.
John?
Yes, I want to take a step back about the global picture. If you haven't had a chance to see yet the BP Statistical Review of World Energy from 2018, it's a fascinating story and a fascinating read. I believe it's available on their website. They did a presentation here in Brussels. Global emissions growing, use of coal growing in several countries in the world, and several countries continue to build coal-fired power generation. I believe we have to reflect on what Europe can and should do to make a difference globally. So what actually I believe is that we've got to work on policy that generates stable and growing demand for low-carbon products. That means all the industrial processes, including everything that we've talked about here today, being supported by industry wanting that energy for its production. So stable and growing demand, business demand level and individual customer demand level for low-carbon products. And we need to then work out how do we encourage other countries to also have that demand. And then, of course, industrially, we need to champion these technologies and get really good. The companies that I represent, they want to do this in Europe, but they don't want it to be an isolated European business opportunity. They actually want it to become a global industry in low-carbon technologies where they can deploy these hundreds of times over and over again and be globally competitive.
Welcome to the club.
Welcome to the Global Alliance Power Exactly. Sorry, Chad, there's one thing I really have to jump in. I mean, I've been agreeing with most of what we've said in here, and I don't know whether you noticed that I grow increasingly nervous over the past 5 minutes because your question is so wrong. I'm so much a European. I'm so much pro-European, and I'm German. I'm proud of our German industries and so on. But the question of whether we're able to produce all of our energy demands within Germany or Europe is just wrong, because there's no need to. We had the same question being discussed in Germany as well. When, with the energy transition, and now you, German Energy Agency, you gave us a study, and in there you're showing us import of energy carriers of whatever it was, 900 terawatt hours per year. How could this be? And our response was, yeah, the energy transition doesn't mean energy autonomy. We still need global energy markets. We have to make sure that it's renewable energy is coming in. And there's one very important aspect being linked to this. If we're talking about power fuels, meaning renewable energy carriers and feedstocks, there's also the question of energy efficiency. And is there energy efficiency high enough? And are we able to produce all of this in Europe? And the question is, again, that's the wrong question, because it's not about energy efficiency in the form of a competition to scarce renewable sources within Europe, but it's importing renewable energy carriers globally, which we just would not be able to import in any other energy carrier, in any other way. There just is no way of importing renewable electricity from whatever it is, South America. But there is a way of importing renewable fuels, gaseous and liquids from South America or other countries. And this is why it's so important thinking on a global market, thinking about global trading schemes, global investment schemes, global certification schemes, and so on, for making sure that there's a global energy transition and a global climate mitigation. So sorry for jumping in. The question of whether we're able to produce all of this in Europe is wrong, but very helpful understanding why it's so important developing a global market on there.
So now you've jumped in just to complete the picture of your thinking for the audience. Your view, therefore, on the import of unabated Russian methane via Nord Stream 2 to Germany?
Well, no comment on that. But frankly, Jorge was so much pointing out that some stakeholders are changing and some views are changing over time.
Let me help him.
And let's see what's going to change in here.
It's not fair that Christoph gets that and you've got me and Jorge on the panel. Okay. Look, we talk about the Nord Stream 2 project, all of the controversy about it. It's been built to a standard, I believe, that is 80% hydrogen-proof. So the idea that I believe the Russians already understand where our future is going in Europe. So I would just add that to help you, Christoph.
On that,
in favour or against, just be clear on that, but we know about its hydrogen abilities.
Now, so I don't know whether Gazprom is here, but Gazprom heavily works on hydrogen via pyrolysis. Pyrolysis is another technology. It's 4 times cheaper than electrolysis. And it gives you hydrogen and carbon black, solid carbon. You use it in that carbon fiber ring here, carbon fiber, to build these pipelines, to build airplanes, to build cars, light, to build the tanks of our hydrogen fuel cell cars. You know, they need carbon fiber. So there is a technology on the way that helps this problem as well.
Thank you. Right, audience, your turn to put the panelists on the spot. Who's got a question? Gentleman in the second row. Microphone, please, for the gentleman in the second row.
No, you have micros there. Right?
Just speak out loud.
You just open your seat and there's a micro inside. You press the button.
Oh, gosh.
There's a micro.
Please introduce yourself, sir.
Press the button. There's a button. In the seat, there's a button.
Oh, wonderful. So, my name is... Does it work? Can you hear me? Yeah. So my name is Andre Lang. I'm a French-German lawyer and have been as well quite heavily involved in biogas. But one point is missing, in my point of view, and that is research. Just a couple of moments ago, there had been a wonderful pitch by a brilliant research guy that was the only one that made 5 out of 5 points in the Horizon 2020 project, and that is about artificial photosynthesis. And I think what we really need to do as well is support research, and here I look at everybody of you. have a look a little bit what kind of money you've got available to support them. Because the European Commission, they put 3.5 million euros on the table. And I can tell you that was the only project that made 5 out of 5. If you want me to introduce him to you, sorry, that's the wrong moment. If you want me to introduce him to him, I can do that. And please do some kind of, damn it.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much, sir.
And please think much more European. We do not necessarily need hydrogen or whatever from South America. But think European, and please develop a transnational European industry initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thomas Novak, European Heat Pump Association.
Good morning. That was probably the most entertaining session I've experienced so far. Certainly more value than what I paid for recently at a theater. Well done.
Thanks to John.
But you carefully evaded the key question of this whole debate. What about the CO2 price really? Jorgo said clearly yes. I would like to have very briefly everybody on this panel yes, no, yes, no. And to John, just one comment. If we would, and I represent the European heat pump industry, so if we would get tax-free electricity, the discussion about heating would be over. So I fully support that. If you get it for hydrogen, we want it for electricity too. But then the question, CO2 price.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Any other questions, audience? Yes, lady there.
I think that's easier because we're all on the same page. CO2 price.
Thank you. Oslo Fjord. There's a thing you haven't mentioned today, and that is if you capture methane from waste from people and animals and even old landfills, you have double action. So methane capture and use is more fun than carbon capture and storage, at least if you're counting the money, as you seem to be. And thank you for very entertaining points on hydrogen. They're cousins. So a lot of people see that going biogas could be scary because what if everyone's hydrogen? Going hydrogen could be scary. What if everyone goes biogas? They're so related that too much of one or too little of the other, just mix it up. So I'm quite keen to remember that we are able to capture methane and that we can help each other more than we have to compete. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Do any of you wish to respond to that?
Well, first of all, yes, I totally agree. We are cousins, and I think I made the relation about this biogenic CO2, so we need you as well. But also in the long run, this all is about material flow management. That's it. Sustainability means the sustainable management of flows, material flows. It's an old idea, but we are getting back to it, and that's why I'm so happy that everybody agrees. So, yes, indeed. Plastic to hydrogen was the topic of the session before in this room. I was yesterday visited by a University of Kyoto professor who is telling me that China stops importing plastics. So Japanese companies take it and produce hydrogen from plastic. That's waste to hydrogen. It exists. We are starting this. I think it's very, very promising, and let's cooperate. So let's do it. It's extremely important for mankind.
Mm-hmm. The lady mentioned CCUS. One so-called clean gas is what I think you describe as blue hydrogen, Jorgo, which is hydrogen produced from CCUS. I'm not going to ask you, I'm going to ask other panelists to comment on how you see the development of CCUS. We've been talking about CCS for years now.
Yes, indeed. I think you're looking at me, so I'm going to rise to the look. Yeah, indeed. I think that's very true. I think that what we are seeing, though, is that we are in a situation where things are being developed and deployed. We have things like the H21 project in Leeds. We've already talked about the ports around Rotterdam. In Dunkirk, you have a steel mill, which Total and ArcelorMittal are building together a CCU facility. also with the help of European Commission funds. I think this is a good signal that there is funding going into this now. And so I think we can be more bullish on the way that it will develop. Also from Eurogas members, talking to members, we have a good German member, Wintershall, very much engaged in developing pyrolysis here, and pyrolysis is a form of CCS, developing it here in Europe. And I think that there is a fundamental shift that companies are already investing in it. The regulatory and the investment framework is now being supported by the political masters. And so I believe that overall we're seeing a different move on CCS, which is why you get things like the UK Climate Change Committee saying CCS is a necessity, not an option, to reach our climate objectives. And I think that there is a growing awareness that that is just basically the fact. And just on the industrial side, maybe John, you also want to say something on that, but CCU is a really good way of actually also helping enhance the competitiveness of European industries. So using it within the processes, cutting cost, and actually using it as a resource to improve your global competitiveness makes CCU in the industrial sector an absolute no-brainer. I don't know, John, if you want to say something on that.
Yeah, yes, I mean, carbon storage is essentially gas production in reverse. The geology we understand extremely well, and it's a critical part of global balancing of the climate. It's work of IPCC and others shows that we'll need many thousands of plants globally. So we really do need to get started. And can I then say something about carbon pricing linked to that? Because it's directly part of the story. So, carbon capture and storage today, around 100 euros a tonne. There are some that hope that they can bring the price down lower. ETS has gone from 5 euros to 25 euros. 25 euros is nowhere near enough. We actually have other policy instruments in Europe that are far stronger than that, such as the obligation to blend renewable fuels, biofuels. And carbon price, around 200 to 300 euros a tonne of carbon. The vehicle regulation, penalty costs for not meeting the vehicle regulation, 500 euros a tonne. The fuel tax that we have is equivalent to around 200 euros a tonne. If you recognise CCS in the production of fuels today and use one of those instruments, it's instantly competitive and very attractive as an investment, but it's just not fitting in any of those regulations. So actually, yes, of course we support carbon pricing, a higher carbon price evenly applied, but critically it must also somehow be reflected in the products that we compete with internationally. And I'm not going straight to the carbon border tariff conversation, but we need to be creative to find out how do you balance that.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Right, audience, there's time for one last question from anybody. Okay, Bojana, any final observation from you?
Any final observation, perhaps on CCS and CCU, is that we are finding as a part of the solution, of course. There are some of our members who are having a project. Our Irish member, the TSO, Gas Network Ireland, unfortunately the Commission left, but they are also facing some kind of questions their side when we are talking about the regulatory framework, where the extent, where the TSO, let's say, business case, its end, and to which extent they're able also to own CO2 pipelines, and then the question is becoming when they need to be connected to offshore. But for me today, well, indeed, it was a very interesting discussion. Most of the things were said. I wanted to complement in few perspectives. For example, when we talk about electrolyze, that we also see a need that this technology needs to be further developed, and it needs to be to further move to megawatt, let's say, operations. So most of the things were already tackled by the gentlemen. Thank you very much for that. For me, it's only to make sure that I leave the room with a very clear message that the gas infrastructure is available, ready today, and able to provide a solution how to decarbonize, let's say, the energy transition by providing possibilities to transit a very large amount of energy, hydrogen, and also green gas.
Thank you, Bojana. Ralph, final observation.
Yeah, starting with the last point on CCS, I think the two of us remember times when we discussed CCS in a different context. I think what was lacking 10 years ago was a business case. It was not technology that was missing. Now, that connects it to the CO2 price. If that changes, And I think I would also answer your question with, yes, we have a strong interest that this changes. Then the business case might arise. Nevertheless, I think CCS might be a step, or CCU might be a step in between. It's not renewable in that sense, but it might be a good step for power generation that we need in between. On research, just to pick up that point, I would definitely underline that we need quite some help on doing a number of research projects to get our technology also ready and demonstrate that it works. So that is a really, really important topic. And I think the last statement from me would be, indeed, we talked a lot about hydrogen and about biomethane. I think, again, we need both sources because you said when talking about renewables, you mainly talk about renewable fuels. I think in Brussels, when we talk about renewables, we think about variable wind and PV mainly. We need all the different sources, the renewable sources, to get the system decarbonized by 2050. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, you've been very well entertained the last hour and a half. Please give the panel a round of applause. Thank you very much.